The Pirathi fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system like a swarm of angry stars. 300 warships, each one burning with internal fires hot enough to melt steel just from proximity. They were beautiful in a terrible way, glowing orange and red against the black of space. Trailing plasma like the tails of comets, Admiral Krath stood on the bridge of the flagship, his silicon body pulsing with temperatures that would instantly kill most organic life forms. He had led the Pirathi Dominion's forces for 200 years, and in all that time, he had never lost a battle. Fire always won. It was the universe's ultimate weapon, the force that broke down all matter, all resistance, all hope. The humans had been warned 3 days ago. The message was simple and had been used successfully on 47 other worlds. Surrender completely or be reduced to ash. It was not a negotiation. It was a statement of fact. Krath expected the usual response: panic, desperate pleas for mercy, perhaps a futile attempt at resistance followed by quick collapse. Instead, the human response had been oddly calm. They declined the offer to surrender and invited the Pirathi to diplomatic discussions. They even provided coordinates for a meeting place. The Admiral's internal flames flickered with what his species considered laughter. Diplomatic discussions. As if there was anything to discuss. As if these soft, water-based creatures could negotiate with living fire. Demonstrate our power, Krath ordered. Target the small moon, the one they called Deimos. The Pirathi fleet moved with practiced efficiency. Stellar incinerators charged, weapons that could focus the power of a sun into a single devastating beam. The crews worked quickly, excited to show these arrogant humans what happened to those who refused the Dominion. Deimos was a small, lifeless rock orbiting Mars. It had no strategic value, no population, no defenses. That was exactly the point. The demonstration needed to be overwhelming and undeniable. The incinerators fired simultaneously. Deimos lit up like a match, its surface instantly reaching temperatures found in the hearts of stars. Within minutes, the entire moon glowed white-hot. Within an hour, it had lost structural integrity, breaking apart into glowing fragments. Within 3 hours, it was nothing but a cloud of superheated gas and molten debris. Send the humans the video recording, Krath commanded. Tell them this is their future if they continue to resist. They have 24 hours to surrender. The human response arrived in 18 hours. It was not a surrender. Instead, humanity activated something the Pirathi had not anticipated. Across Earth, massive population movements began. Satellites showed millions of humans moving in organized streams toward specific locations. Cities didn't panic or descend into chaos. Instead, they evacuated with surprising efficiency. What are they doing? Krath's second officer asked, studying the data. They're hiding underground, Krath said, his flames brightening with contempt. They think they can wait us out in bunkers like frightened insects. But something about the movement patterns bothered him. The humans weren't running randomly. They had clearly prepared for this. Infrastructure existed that shouldn't exist. Entire underground complexes that the Pirathi scouts had somehow missed. Transportation networks that move millions of people in mere hours. How long have they been preparing for this? The second officer wondered aloud. Krath dismissed the concern. It doesn't matter. Underground or above ground, they'll burn the same. We'll simply heat the planet's surface until the crust itself becomes uninhabitable. They'll either come out and die quickly, or stay in and die slowly when their air and water run out. The fleet moved into Earth's orbit. The world below looked peaceful, blue and white and green, covered in oceans and clouds. It reminded Krath of other worlds he had burned. They all looked peaceful before the fire came. Begin atmospheric ignition, he ordered. The Pirathi warships descended into the upper atmosphere. releasing plasma charges designed to ignite oxygen-rich air. On worlds with the right conditions, this would create a cascading effect, turning the entire atmosphere into a brief inferno that would sterilize the surface. Earth's atmosphere didn't cooperate. The oxygen levels were right, but something about the atmospheric composition prevented the cascade. The fires burned hot and fierce in localized areas, but didn't spread as they should. Later analysis would show that humans had released fire-suppressant compounds into the upper atmosphere days earlier. They had known what was coming and had taken precautions. Frustrated but not concerned, Krath ordered a more direct approach. The fleet spread out across the planet and began systematically burning surface targets. Cities, forests, farmlands, anything that could burn. The planet below began to char and smoke. Still, no surrender came. Instead, the Pirathi forces began encountering automated defenses, missile installations that fired from hidden bunkers, satellite weapons that used kinetic projectiles rather than energy beams, drones that attacked with conventional explosives, seemingly unafraid of the heat that should have melted them before they got close. The defenses weren't particularly effective. Each Pirathi ship could withstand dozens of hits from such primitive weapons. But they existed at all, and that was noteworthy. The humans were fighting back. "They're determined," the second officer observed. But determination burns just like everything else. Krath agreed. He had seen determined species before. They all fell eventually. Fire was patient, and fire was inevitable. The humans would learn this lesson as so many others had. The Pirathi settled into what they expected would be a short siege. They would burn the surface, wait for the humans to deplete their underground resources, and accept the inevitable surrender. It would take a few weeks at most. It always did. Admiral Krath watched Earth burn below him and felt satisfied. Another world, another victory. Fire had never failed the Pirathi Dominion, and it never would. He had no way of knowing that the humans below were not preparing to surrender. They were preparing to teach the Pirathi a lesson that would echo across the galaxy. They were preparing to show what happened when fire met the one species that had built its entire civilization on mastering flames. 3 weeks into the bombardment, Admiral Krath began to feel something he had not experienced in decades. Uncertainty. Earth's surface was a burning wasteland. Forests had been reduced to ash. Oceans boiled at their edges, creating massive steam clouds that covered entire continents. Cities that once held millions were now nothing but charred ruins and melted metal. By every calculation, by every precedent from every previous conquest, humanity should have surrendered by now. Instead, they kept fighting. The automated defenses had seemed like a minor annoyance at first. Now they were a constant threat. Missiles emerged from hidden silos that should have been destroyed days ago. Railguns fired from underground positions that proved nearly impossible to locate before they disappeared again. Human drones, small and fast, darted through the smoke and fire to strike at Pirathi ships with a persistence that bordered on insanity. "How many supply bases do they have?" the second officer asked, studying the tactical display. "We've destroyed 17 major military installations, but the attacks aren't decreasing." Krath's flames flickered with irritation. "They're using distributed infrastructure. Small bases, hidden networks, redundant systems. It's inefficient but difficult to completely eliminate." What he didn't say was that it suggested a level of preparation that made no sense. This infrastructure had been built before the Pirathi arrived. The humans had been preparing for apocalyptic war, not as a response to an immediate threat, but as a standing contingency, as if they had always expected someone might try to burn their world. The ground war began when Pirathi warriors descended to establish control zones. They were confident. Each Pirathi soldier burned at temperatures that would melt conventional armor. Their weapons turned matter to plasma. They have conquered worlds by simply walking across them, burning everything in their path. The first patrols reported easy victories. Then they stopped reporting at all. Recovery teams found the warriors frozen solid, their silicon bodies shattered like glass. The humans had used some kind of cryo-weapon, flash freezing the soldiers faster than their internal heat could compensate. It was a weakness the Perethi had never had to worry about before. In 10,000 years of conquest, no species had thought to fight fire with ice. Krath ordered new protocols. Warriors would travel in larger groups with overlapping heat fields to prevent freezing. It worked for a while, until the humans adapted again. Human resistance fighters began appearing in thermal suits that looked designed for solar exploration. They moved through the burning landscape like ghosts, striking from positions that should have been uninhabitable. They used weapons cooled by exotic matter, firing projectiles that stayed stable even in extreme heat. They set traps that exploited Perethi tactics and weaknesses that the humans somehow already knew about. "They're learning too fast," the second officer said after reviewing the latest engagement ports. "We changed tactics, and within days they've developed countermeasures. It's like they're studying us in real time." Krath had to agree. The humans had captured several Perethi soldiers and pieces of equipment. Intelligence suggested they were analyzing everything, reverse engineering Perethi technology in underground laboratories. The speed of their progress was frankly alarming. More disturbing were the reports from other engagement zones. Human forces weren't just defending. They were communicating, coordinating, sharing information across their entire resistance network. When one cell learned something useful, all cells knew it within hours. The humans fought like a single organism with millions of parts, each learning from all the others. The Perethi Dominion had always won through overwhelming power. They had never needed to adapt because fire was always enough. Now they faced an enemy that adapted faster than they could overwhelm, and it was a deeply uncomfortable experience. 4 weeks in, the humans launched their first major counteroffensive. It started with coordinated strikes on Perethi supply ships in orbit. Human vessels, hidden in the debris field of Dymas, emerged and attacked with kinetic weapons that bypassed heat shields entirely. They weren't elegant or sophisticated. They were just large chunks of metal accelerated to ridiculous speeds. Simple physics. Mass times velocity equals a very bad day for whoever was in the way. 3 supply ships were destroyed before the Perethi could respond. 2 more were damaged. The attackers vanished back into the debris field before pursuit could be organized. Then the ground assaults intensified. Human forces hit Perethi landing zones simultaneously across 4 continents. They used the smoke and steam from the burning planet as cover, appearing and disappearing like vengeful spirits. They employed what Perethi intelligence called guerrilla tactics, a concept the Dominion had never encountered because most species fought conventionally or not at all. The humans didn't fight fair. They ambushed. They used the terrain. They struck at supply lines and communications. They targeted Perethi commanders specifically, having somehow identified them despite no visible rank insignia. They fought dirty, efficiently, and with a creativity that made them extremely difficult to predict. Krath received reports of something even more disturbing: psychological warfare. Captured Perethi soldiers were being held in climate-controlled facilities, kept at temperatures that wouldn't harm them but were uncomfortably cool. They were given adequate resources and treated according to something the humans called the Geneva Conventions, a set of rules about how to treat prisoners during war. The concept baffled Krath. Why waste resources on enemy prisoners? Why treat them well? The Perethi had never taken prisoners because there was usually nothing left to capture after they were done. But the psychological effect was undeniable. Perethi soldiers began surrendering rather than fighting to the death. It was unprecedented. They had seen what happened to prisoners. They knew they would survive, and they chose capture over combat. Morale across the fleet began to crack. 6 weeks into what should have been a routine conquest, Admiral Krath had to admit something he had never admitted before. The battle was not going according to plan. Half of Earth's surface was a burning hell that would take centuries to recover. But humanity was still fighting, still adapting, still refusing to surrender. They had lost millions of people in the bombardment, entire cities and populations, and yet they kept coming. Krath studied the tactical displays and tried to understand what he was facing. These weren't warriors in the traditional sense. Warriors fought with honor, with strength, with direct confrontation. The humans fought like survivors, using every advantage, every trick, every desperate measure to stay alive just one more day. It should have been contemptible. Instead, it was terrifying. The second officer approached with the latest casualty reports. The Pirathi had lost 15% of their ground forces and 7% of their fleet. Against any other species, those would be acceptable losses. Against humans, they represented an alarming trend. The losses were accelerating, not decreasing. "Admiral," the second officer said quietly, "some of the ship commanders are asking when we can expect reinforcements." Krath's flames dimmed. Asking for reinforcements would be admitting that 300 warships couldn't conquer a single world. It would be admitting weakness. It would be admitting that fire might not be enough. But as he watched another patrol go silent on the display, eliminated by humans using tactics the Pirathi had no doctrine for, Krath began to wonder if reinforcements would even help. The humans weren't winning, but they weren't losing either. And every day they survived, they got stronger, smarter, more dangerous. For the first time in 200 years of conquest, Admiral Krath wondered if fire might fail. The turning point came in the 3rd month, and it came from a direction Admiral Krath had never anticipated. The human fleet revealed itself. They had been hiding in the outer system, beyond Neptune, conserved and concealed while Earth burned. The Pirathi had known about some human ships, had even destroyed a few, but the full strength of humanity's space force had been an unknown. Intelligence had suggested perhaps 50 warships, outdated and outgunned. 200 vessels emerged from the dark, and they were nothing like what the Pirathi expected. They didn't try to match Pirathi heat. They didn't armor themselves against plasma and fire. Instead, they had built their ships around a different philosophy entirely. Their hulls were covered in reflective materials that bounced back thermal radiation. They carried massive heat sinks that absorbed and dissipated energy. They used magnetic fields to deflect plasma, where Pirathi ships were like torches, burning bright and hot. Human ships were like mirrors and shadows, built not to withstand fire but to redirect it, avoid it, survive it. The first engagement proved the concept. Pirathi incinerators fired at the approaching human fleet, massive beams of concentrated stellar energy that should have vaporized the primitive ships. Instead, the beams scattered off reflective surfaces or were absorbed by materials the Pirathi had never seen before. Some human ships still burned, still died, but not nearly as many as should have. The humans returned fire with kinetic weapons, railguns, and missiles carrying payloads that exploded into clouds of reflective chaff. They fought at range, used their speed, and when Pirathi ships closed distance to use their heat as a weapon, the humans simply withdrew. It was frustrating, undignified, and remarkably effective. "They're using our own power against us," the second officer observed as another Pirathi cruiser found itself trapped in a cage of solar mirrors. The human ships reflecting and focusing its own heat back at it until critical systems began failing. Krath watched his fleet being systematically dismantled by inferior ships using superior tactics. The humans weren't stronger. They were smarter. And in space combat, that was proving to matter more. The ground war shifted as well. Human forces pushed out from their underground bases in a coordinated offensive. They had been learning, adapting, and preparing. Now they showed what 3 months of preparation could achieve. Cryoweapons had evolved. The new versions could freeze entire zones, creating fields of extreme cold that Pirathi warriors couldn't cross without risking structural failure. Human soldiers advanced behind these frozen barriers, using them as shields while they targeted Pirathi positions. Oxygen deprivation munitions appeared on the battlefield. They created brief vacuums, suffocating the fires that sustained Pirathi biology. Warriors who survived reported feeling their internal flames flickering, gasping for sustenance in airless zones. It was a sensation Pirathi had never experienced before, and it was deeply traumatic. But the most effective human tactic was psychological. They had studied the Pirathi for 3 months, learned their language, their culture, their beliefs. Now they used that knowledge as a weapon. They broadcast messages into Pirathi communications, showing captured soldiers living comfortably in cool environments, eating, resting, talking about how the war didn't have to continue. They showed images of Earth before the burning, beautiful, and alive, and asked Pirathi soldiers if this was really what they wanted to be remembered for. They asked questions the Pirathi had never considered. Why were they doing this? What did the Dominion gain from burning worlds? Was conquest really worth dying for? These weren't warrior questions. Warriors didn't doubt. But the humans asked them anyway, and some Pirathi began to think about the answers. Morale collapsed like a dying star. Surrender rates increased daily. Entire units refused to fight, requesting extraction or simply waiting in defensive positions for human forces to capture them. The concept of the indomitable Pirathi warrior, burning bright and unstoppable, died in the frozen trenches of Earth. Admiral Krath tried to rally his forces. He broadcast speeches about Pirathi superiority, about the glory of fire, about their 10,000-year legacy of conquest. Some soldiers listened. Many did not. The final blow came when the humans captured a Pirathi command post and found strategic data about the Dominion. Locations of supply bases, fleet movements, homeworld coordinates. The humans didn't destroy it. They studied it and then broadcast an analysis to every Pirathi ship in the system. The message was simple. The Pirathi had overextended. The fleet at Earth represented a significant portion of Dominion military strength. If they lost here, if they kept dying in this pointless war, the Dominion would be vulnerable to other species, other threats. The Pirathi were not invincible. They were burning themselves out against an enemy that refused to die. It was truth delivered like a blade. Krath watched his fleet's cohesion shatter. Ship commanders began requesting orders to withdraw. Some ships left without orders, simply retreating to safe distance and waiting. The Pirathi war machine, so effective for so long, ground to a halt, not because it was defeated, but because it stopped believing in itself. 4 months into the war, Krath had lost 40% of his forces. 60 ships destroyed, dozens more damaged beyond repair, thousands of warriors dead or captured. The surface of Earth was ruined, burned beyond recognition, but humanity still fought, still survived. The admiral stood on his bridge and faced the reality he had refused to acknowledge. Fire had failed. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Pirathi Dominion had truly, completely failed. He could order the fleet to withdraw. He could request reinforcements and continue the war. Or he could do something no Pirathi commander had done and recorded history. He could admit defeat. The decision was made easier when the humans sent him a message. Not a demand for surrender, not a threat. An invitation. Admiral Krath, the message began, delivered by a human diplomat who looked exhausted but determined. We have both lost too much in this war. Your people have died. Our world burns. This can end in mutual destruction, or it can end in peace. We invite you to meet with us, to discuss terms, to find a better path forward. Fire has failed against humanity, not because we are stronger, but because we refuse to give up. Let us show you that there is strength in survival and wisdom in knowing when to stop fighting. Krath listened to the message 3 times. His pride demanded he refuse, demanded he fight until every human was dead or every Pirathi ship was destroyed. But pride was a luxury, and the Pirathi Dominion could no longer afford it. He sent a response accepting the invitation. The human diplomat smiled. A strange expression the Pirathi didn't quite understand, but one that seemed to indicate satisfaction without hostility. "We'll meet you at the coordinates we're sending," the human said. "Neutral space, no weapons, just talking. We have much to discuss, Admiral. About the past, about the future, and about what happens when fire meets the species that first learned to control it." Krath didn't understand that last comment, but he would soon. The humans had one more lesson to teach, and it was the most important one of all. The war was ending. What came next would change both species forever. The meeting took place on a human space station in neutral territory, far enough from Earth that neither side felt threatened. Admiral Krath arrived with 2 guards, both unarmed as agreed. The humans met them in a conference room that had been carefully temperature-controlled to accommodate Pirathi biology. The human delegation was led by a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, an older human with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much loss. She greeted Krath with a slight bow, a gesture of respect that surprised him. "Admiral," she said, "thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy for you." Krath's flames flickered cautiously. "You beat us. Surely you wish to gloat." "No," Chum said simply. "We don't. We want to understand you, and we want you to understand us. Then we want to figure out how to never do this again." The negotiations lasted 3 days. They were unlike anything Krath had experienced. The humans didn't demand unconditional surrender. They didn't ask for reparations that would cripple the Dominion. Instead, they asked questions. Why had the Pirathi attacked? What did they hope to gain? How did their society function? What did they value? Krath answered honestly, perhaps more honestly than he had intended. The Pirathi Dominion had been conquering for so long that no one questioned it anymore. It was simply what they did, who they were. Fire consumed, fire spread, fire dominated. To stop conquering would be to deny their nature. But why? Chun pressed. "What does your society gain from burning other worlds? Resources? Territory? Pride?" Krath had no good answer. The conquered worlds were usually so damaged they provided little value. The territory was vast but largely uninhabitable for Pirathi. The pride was real, but pride didn't feed populations or advance civilization. They conquered because they always had. It was tradition without purpose, legacy without meaning. Chun listened patiently, then began sharing humanity's story. She told Krath about human history, about wars and disasters, about ice ages and plagues that nearly destroyed their species. She explained how humans had survived not through dominance, but through adaptation, cooperation, and an almost stubborn refusal to accept extinction. "We've nearly wiped ourselves out a dozen times," Chun said. "Nuclear weapons, climate change, diseases, wars. We've imagined the apocalypse in 1,000 different ways. That's why we were prepared for you. Not because we knew you were coming, but because we've always prepared for the worst." She showed him images of Earth before the burning. Cities full of life, forests teeming with animals, oceans rich with countless species. Then she showed him Earth now, a charred planet wrapped in smoke, its surface a wasteland that would take centuries to heal. "This is what fire does," Chun said quietly. "It destroys. It's powerful and it's final, and it leaves nothing behind but ash. Is that really the legacy your people want?" Krath felt something shift inside him, a sensation he couldn't name. Looking at the ruined Earth, he saw not a victory, but a waste. All that diversity, all that life, reduced to nothing. And for what? The Dominion wouldn't settle here. They wouldn't use its resources. They had simply destroyed it because they could. The conversation shifted when Chun began discussing human history with fire itself. "Your species wields fire as a weapon," she said. "But humans grew up with fire. Our ancestors discovered it millions of years ago on the plains of Africa. It terrified them at first, this thing that burned and consumed and destroyed. But then they learned to control it." She pulled up images. Ancient cave paintings showing primitive humans gathered around flames, using them for warmth, for cooking, for protection from predators. "We didn't run from fire," Chun continued. "We made it ours. We built our entire civilization on it. Fire to forge metal. Fire to power engines. Fire to cook food and light the darkness. Fire is fundamental to everything we are." Krath understood then. The humans hadn't just survived the Pyrrhic assault through preparation and tactics. They had survived because fire was already part of their nature. They knew it intimately, respected it deeply, and feared it not at all. "You weren't the first flame we conquered," Chun said with a slight smile. "You were just the most recent." The statement should have been insulting, but Krath felt no anger. Instead, he felt something like respect. These strange water-based creatures had looked at the Pyrrhic, Dominion's ultimate weapon, and seemed simply another problem to solve, another challenge to overcome. The peace terms were surprisingly generous. The Pyrrhic would withdraw completely from human space. They would provide technical assistance in helping Earth recover, sharing their knowledge of stellar engineering to help restore the planet's climate. In exchange, humanity would not pursue the war into Pyrrhic territory and would advocate for the Dominion in the wider galactic community. "We're not interested in revenge," Chun explained. "We're interested in survival and coexistence. You came to our world expecting easy conquest. Instead, you found a species that refuses to die. Now, tell other species. Tell them that humanity will fight for every inch, every day, every life. Tell them that fire failed here, and anything else will fail too. But also tell them," she added more softly, "that humans prefer peace. We'll fight when we must, but we'd rather build than burn. We'd rather cooperate than conquer." Krath agreed to the terms. Before leaving, he asked one final question. "How did you do it? How did you survive when so many other species fell?" Chun thought for a moment. "Because we've had to. Humans evolved on a world that kept trying to kill us. Ice ages, predators, diseases, natural disasters. We survived because we adapted, because we worked together, because we never gave up. Earth made us tough. Your fire just reminded us why." The Pyrrhic fleet departed 2 days later. They left behind technical assistance teams and supplies, the first reparations in Dominion history. Krath watched Earth recede in his view screen, still burning but showing signs of recovery. Automated systems were already working to clean the atmosphere. Humans were emerging from underground to begin rebuilding. They would survive. They always did. Back on the Dominion homeworld, Krath made his report to the Council. He expected to be stripped of rank, possibly executed for the failure. Instead, the Council listened in silence as he described the war, the losses, and the lessons learned. "Fire failed," he concluded. "Not because it wasn't strong enough, but because we faced a species that understood fire better than we do. They grew up with it. They mastered it before they ever left their world. We never stood a chance." The Council debated for hours. Finally, they made a decision that would reshape Pyrrhic society. No more random conquests. No more burning worlds just to prove they could. The Dominion would need to find a new purpose, a new identity beyond fire and destruction. it would take time. Change always did. But the seed had been planted. 5 years later, a joint human-Pyrrhothy research station orbited Earth. Scientists from both species worked together, studying stellar phenomena, developing new technologies, and slowly building something neither species had expected: friendship. Dr. Chun visited the station regularly. During one visit, a young Pyrrhothy researcher approached her with a question that clearly bothered him. "Dr. Chun," he said hesitantly, "I've been studying human history. Your species is so resilient. You adapt so quickly. Why?" Chun smiled. It was a question she'd answered many times now, but she never tired of it. "Because we have to," she said. "Because our world taught us that survival isn't about being the strongest or the hottest or the most powerful. It's about being adaptable, persistent, and clever. It's about refusing to quit even when everything seems hopeless." "But you're such a young species," the researcher said. "How did you develop these traits so fast?" Chun looked out the station window at Earth below. The scars were still visible, burned continents slowly turning green again, but life was returning. Always returning. "We're young," she agreed. "But we've been fighting for survival since the day our ancestors picked up the first burning stick and said, 'This is mine now.' Fire failed against humanity once before, millions of years ago on the African savanna. Your admiral never stood a chance." The researcher's flames flickered with what Chun had learned to recognize as amusement. "I think," he said, "that the galaxy underestimates humans at its peril." "Let's hope they learn from your example," Chun replied, "and choose peace instead." Outside, Earth turned slowly in space, scarred but surviving, just like it always had. And on its surface, millions of humans worked to rebuild, to recover, to ensure that they would be ready for whatever came next, because that's what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They endured. Fire had failed against humanity. Nothing else would succeed either.